Welcome to City Vision University's podcast, providing book summaries of books on rescue missions, city missions, and the Salvation Army.
Glad to be here.
So today we're doing a deep dive into the history of the Seattle Union Gospel Mission, and we're pulling a lot of this from Herbert A. Pfiffner's historical account, More Than 1,000 Points of Light.
Right. It's a really incredible source.
It is, because I want you to imagine for a second trying to feed an army of desperate, starving men.
Yeah.
But you have almost no money, and you're using a borrowed copper candy kettle.
Like a literal candy kettle.
Right. Not a commercial soup vat. This was a massive blackened pot that, they normally use to boil sugar and water to make fondants.
The irony there is just, it's pretty wild.
It really is. So today, we're looking at the actual practical mechanics of extreme compassion.
Exactly.
We're exploring how a safety net operates, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 60 years, starting right in the absolute teeth of the Great Depression.
Yeah, and it's not just some dry history lesson about a charity.
No, not at all.
It's really a masterclass in logistics and psychology and just pure human endurance, because the evolution is staggering.
It really is.
You watch them start in 1932 with this one borrowed kettle and a few volunteers, and then it transforms into this highly complex, multifaceted operational machine.
Right, because it had to become a machine.
Oh, absolutely. They ended up tackling societal failures they couldn't possibly have imagined in the 30s.
Like what?
Well, they start out handing soup to unemployed lumberjacks, right? But skip forward a few decades, and they're designing interventions for gang violence.
Wow.
Yeah, and dealing with the crack epidemic and, trying to break systemic multi-generational addiction. It's just a profound lens into how American vulnerability changed over half a century.
Okay, but before we get into all that complex stuff and why their blueprint actually matters to anyone trying to solve social problems today, we need to set the scene.
We have to go back to the literal Skid Road.
Yes. And I mean literal. When you look at the historical accounts of Seattle's pioneer days, you find all these visceral stories about the fabled Yesler Mill.
Right, because lumber wasn't just the economy. It was the physical geography of the place.
Exactly. So loggers would cut these incredibly steep inclines straight through the dense woods, and they would literally grease these dirt paths
to slide the logs down.
Yeah. So massive ox teams could pull these giant felled trees from the top of the hill all the way down to the mill at the water. They called it a skid road.
A physical track just designed to let heavyweights slide downhill as fast as possible.
Right, and that mechanism kind of built the city.
Oh, it did. At the turn of the century, Seattle was all glitter and gold. It was built on this seemingly endless timber industry.
The skid road meant progress.
It did. But then, as the records from the era show, the bottom just completely dropped out of the world.
The Great Depression.
Yeah, the sky shattered overnight. The massive mills just went entirely silent.
The waterfront was deserted.
Completely deserted. And suddenly, the landscape mutates. You get these massive shanty towns popping up.
Like Hoovertown.
Exactly, Hoovertown. Wow. It was this sprawling, chaotic settlement built right in the middle of a failed shipyard. Just scrounged lumber, tin, whatever they could find.
Just people eking out like the barest biological survival.
Yeah. And the atmosphere of Seattle's Yesler Way during this time is just bleak.
They called it the Boulevard of Broken Dreams.
Yeah, they did. Imagine walking those streets today. You wouldn't see coffee shops. You'd see condemned, padlocked buildings.
Smashed windows.
Right. And these cheap neon signs buzzing in the fog, offering 5-cent coffee and, 25-cent beds in a flop house.
Just total desperation.
Total suffocating desperation.
Now, the irony here is incredibly dark, because that literal logging path in Seattle, that greased track for moving dead timber downhill, that birthed the nationwide term Skid Row.
It's a profound linguistic shift,
Yeah, the path where trees slid to the mill became the path where broken lives slid to the bottom of society.
That's exactly it. And right in the middle of that catastrophic slide, on August 21st, 1932, the Seattle Union Gospel Mission was born.
Started by Dr. Francis O. Peterson.
Yes, he opens the doors of this humble storefront. And the ethos from night one is just unapologetically radical. Whosoever will may come.
See, the audacity of that is what stops me in my tracks.
Oh, for sure.
Because, it's one thing for you or me to walk down a modern Skid Row, feel some sympathy, and hand a sandwich out our car window.
Right. Maybe donate $20.
Exactly. But it is an entirely different level of commitment to stand in a city going through a total economic collapse when literally nobody has capital.
Yeah.
And say, we're going to start a massive logistical operation to feed everyone who walks through these doors.
It's almost crazy.
It is. There's that quote from a columnist at the time. He said, one day Seattle was all dressed up, and the next night she had absolutely no place to go.
The panic was palpable.
People were starving. So how do they even begin? What is a practical starting point for a promise that massive?
Well, the crazy part is they began with almost zero infrastructure.
Really?
Yeah. The founders were just this small, sort of disparate group of businessmen and clergymen meeting quietly at the YMCA.
So no government grants?
None. No sophisticated fundraising arm, no wealthy board.
Wow.
What they had was this unifying conviction. It was rooted in this old Puritan philosophy. When you pray, move your feet.
I love that. When you pray, move your feet.
Right. And when they moved their feet out onto those streets, they stepped into an absolute battleground.
What do you mean?
Well, historical accounts say that at the intersection of Washington and Occidental Avenues, there was just this constant bedlam of conflicting voices.
Like who?
You had radical political harangues from the industrial workers of the world. You had highly organized communist factions rallying the unemployed. And you had fiery gospel services.
So everyone's competing.
Yes, and to be clear, the sources are just documenting this historically. We're not taking any political sides here. But they were all on the exact same street corners, shouting over each other, trying to capture the attention of these desperate, transient men.
So the streets were basically a chaotic marketplace of survival ideologies.
Exactly.
Unions offering labor power, political factions offering revolution, preachers offering salvation.
And into that intense marketplace steps Dr. Peterson and the UGM. But they didn't bring another political debate. They brought immediate biological intervention because they knew a starving man cannot process political theory.
No, we really can't.
And he can't process theology either. He only processes hunger.
But having a radical ethos means nothing if the soup bowl is empty.
Oh, completely.
They made this massive promise, and now the streets are demanding calories. How do you biologically sustain that with zero infrastructure?
Well, that brings us back to Elisha's kettle. Because the logistics here, the math just stops making any rational sense.
Okay, lay it out for me.
So right behind the mission's original location was the Society Candy Company.
Right.
And the mission worked out a deal to use their giant blackened copper kettle, the one used for luxury chocolate treats.
The juxtaposition is just poetic.
Yeah.
This vessel for luxury candies becomes the absolute lifeline for the destitute.
The literal heartbeat of the operation. 2 candy company workers would actually stay late and use that kettle to brew a giant batch of stew for the mission's evening meal.
Wow.
Yeah, the copper retained massive amounts of heat so they could stretch whatever meager ingredients they had.
And then they had to move it, right?
Yeah, mid-morning the next day, they had to physically lug that heavy, empty kettle back to the sparse mission kitchen so the cook could make the noon meal.
Just a daily, exhausting scramble.
Relying entirely on the goodwill of a candy company.
Okay, I really want to zoom in on the actual numbers here. We have their first-year budget data from 1938.
Oh, this is astonishing.
It is. The total budget for the entire year was $1,387.78. Total. For a 365-day operation, let me break down where that went. Rent was $375 for the year. Direct relief, so food, clothing, emergency aid, was $137. Miscellaneous supplies, $126. Lights and fuel, which are absolutely critical in a freezing Seattle winter, $321.78.
Right.
And Dr. Peterson, the superintendent, was offered a salary of $40 a month, but he refused it.
He took even less.
Yes, so more money could go to the soup line. He had this philosophy, which is in the records, people can live on less when they have more to live for.
That phrase is really the psychological engine of the early mission.
But look at the ROI. With roughly $1,300, records show they fed almost 18,000 men.
Yeah, and an estimated 27,000 individuals attended their services just to get out of the freezing rain.
Look at this through the lens of a modern startup's burn rate.
Right, it's unbelievable.
Feeding 18,000 people on $1,300. Yep. Even with 1930s purchasing power, that's pennies per meal. You can't just budget your way into feeding an army on pennies. There has to be a different mechanism at play.
There is. It requires a framework that completely inverts traditional financial logic.
Okay, what does that mean?
Dr. Peterson operated on what the historical accounts call the stretcher philosophy.
The stretcher.
Yeah. In a traditional nonprofit, you look at your reserves, you measure your capacity by the coins in your desk. If you have $10, you help 10 people, then you close the door.
Makes sense.
But Peterson refused to operate that way. He used the biblical story of Elisha's widow.
Oh, right, the oil jars.
Exactly. She was facing starvation, and the prophet tells her to take her last tiny jar of oil and just start pouring it into empty vessels. Against all logic, she keeps pouring, and the oil doesn't stop until every vessel is full.
So he took that literally.
Very literally. It was his reproducible operational framework. Instead of hoarding their meager funds out of fear, he poured them out immediately onto the street.
So it's the difference between a scarcity mindset and an abundance mindset.
Yes.
But how does an abundance mindset pay the actual light bill?
By treating resources as a river rather than a reservoir. The moment a donation came in, it was converted into calories and distributed. They believed hoarding spelled the flow. If they emptied their hands by serving the man in front of them, their hands were empty and ready to receive the next donation.
And did it work?
Remarkably, yes. The accounts say the soup lasted exactly as long as the line. There were days the stew was just flavored water, sure.
Right.
But the kettle never ran completely dry while a hungry man was standing there.
And the men in that line, they really defied modern stereotypes of homelessness.
Completely.
The Great Depression was the ultimate equalizer. It decimated the middle and upper classes overnight.
You had rough lumberjacks and ex-convicts standing next to bankers, professors, tradesmen.
There's that striking story from 1936.
Oh, the MIT grad.
Yes, this man stumbles into the mission, completely collapses on the floor from starvation. They revive him, learn his story, and find out he's a graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
An MIT grad, dying on a Seattle sidewalk.
Right. He had lost his specialized job, run out of savings, got stranded on the coast. And when he regained his strength, he didn't just say they gave him a meal. He said, they gave me back my life.
That story is so crucial because it highlights the psychological devastation of extreme need.
Yeah. Why is the physical act of handing someone soup so critical beyond just the biological aspect?
It comes down to an insight from an early rescue mission pioneer named Mel Trotter.
Oh.
Trotter understood the connection between biology and human dignity. Chronic hunger doesn't just empty the stomach, it strips you of your self-worth.
It's pure shame.
Deep, paralyzing shame. It reduces a highly educated MIT grad to a state of primal panic. Trotter's philosophy was that you absolutely cannot reach a person's intellect or spirit if their stomach is empty.
You can't counsel a starving man.
Exactly. The physical requirement of bread has to be met first. By freely offering a hot meal without judgment, you validate their dignity. You rebuild the body before the mind can even receive what they called bread for the soul.
So they established this vital foothold. But time doesn't stand still. As the 1930s bleed into the 40s, society shifts. And poverty, they discover, doesn't discriminate.
No, it doesn't.
The demographics widen, and the organization has to expand.
Right, it's a very agile response to the city. In 1940, they opened a women's division.
And then WWII happens.
Yeah, by 1943, the streets are flooded with young, traumatized soldiers, so they pivot again. They take over the second floor at a 110 Cherry Street and open the Victory Servicemen's Center.
And they start helping kids too, right?
Yeah, they establish inner-city programs like the Lake Sammamish Bible Camp.
But expanding your physical footprint is the easy part.
Staffing it is the nightmare.
Exactly. You need a very specific, almost irrational type of human being to do this daily labor. Which brings us to the concept of the call.
Yes.
Let's dig into Marjorie Sutherland, because her story defies every modern concept of self-preservation.
It really does. So Marjorie was widowed in 1948, left alone to support her young daughter. She bounces between grueling jobs for decades just to survive.
Just a quiet, relentless struggle.
Yeah. And then finally, in 1967, when most people are looking to retire, she sees a brochure asking for a matron at the mission's women's division, the Friendly Inn.
And she
Applies, flies to Seattle, and goes straight from the airport into the gritty inner city.
We have to paint the picture of what being a matron at the Friendly Inn actually entailed.
Yeah.
Because this was not a desk job.
No, not at all.
She is plunging broken, overflowing pipes in the middle of the night.
Sloshing through freezing floods in the hallways when the roof leaks.
Dealing with terrified young prostitutes hiding from pimps. Women having severe psychological breaks. I mean, in one account, she's literally holding off an armed robber at the door.
And yet, look at her reaction to her living quarters.
Right. They show her to this bare freezing room. High ceilings, cracked plaster, a tiny sink, and this used, sagging bed.
And she doesn't quit.
No. She looks at that bleak room and views it as a profound sign that she's finally free from needing worldly comforts.
which requires a total fundamental paradigm shift in how you view success and purpose.
Absolutely.
The historical records place her in a very specific lineage of workers. It traces back to figures like Jerry McCauley.
Who was he?
A notorious ex-river thief and con man in New York in the late 1800s. He had a conversion in prison, and instead of fleeing the slums, he went straight back to the most dangerous waterfront in America and founded the first rescue mission.
Wow.
Same with Billy Sunday, famous baseball player turned preacher in a gritty Chicago mission. The common denominator is this deeply internalized, unshakable sense of vocation.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
Because to anyone listening right now, Marjorie's job sounds like a waking nightmare.
Oh, totally.
If your friend said, I'm taking a job working 80-hour weeks for a poverty wage to live in a cracked room, fight off armed robbers, and wade through raw sewage, you tell them to run.
You'd stage an intervention.
Exactly. Yeah. From a psychological standpoint, what possible mechanism makes a human stay in an environment that feels physically degrading?
It's the most vital question you can ask about this work, and the historical framework reveals that this kind of decades-long endurance absolutely cannot be fueled by mere sympathy.
Because sympathy runs out.
Right. Sympathy is an emotion, and emotions burn out. Sentimentality shatters the first time you're threatened by an armed robber.
Or the 10th time you clean up a flooded hallway at 3 a.m.
Exactly. So these workers frame their endurance through the theological and psychological concept of the call.
Right.
It's rooted in the biblical narrative of Isaiah 6.8. The prophet hears the voice of God asking, "Whom shall I send?" And he replies, "Here am I, send me."
They don't view it as a career choice.
No, or even a social work. They view it as a profound, irrevocable, divine commission.
So the conviction itself functions as psychological armor.
Precisely. It alters their relationship to hardship. If you believe with absolute certainty that you were divinely placed in that exact flooded hallway for a higher purpose, the hardship ceases to be a sign of failure.
It's not proof you made a terrible career choice.
Right. It's just the accepted terrain of the assignment you volunteered for. It gives their minds structural integrity so they can minister to the deeply traumatized without losing their own sanity.
That makes a lot of sense. But as the decades roll on, an organization needs more than just individual saints with psychological armor.
You need leadership.
Right. Transitioning from a survival storefront to a complex institutional force is terrifying. They needed a leader who could handle bureaucracy but keep the grit of the street.
Enter Steve Berger.
Tell me about him.
Well, he grew up in Minnesota, and his childhood memories were forged carrying hot plates of food on freezing Christmas days to isolated widows in his neighborhood.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he was deeply influenced by Walt Schunk from the St. Paul UGM. Before Seattle, Berger was in York, Pennsylvania, building complex rehab and youth programs from the ground up.
So he was an operational architect.
Exactly. And he brought this highly strategic vision to Seattle. He relentlessly branded the UGM as the church with its sleeves rolled up, or the church in overalls.
The church in overalls.
Yeah.
That phrasing is brilliant organizational positioning.
Oh, it was genius.
Because Berger arrives during a highly volatile time in American religious history, the 60s and 70s. You have this massive demographic shift. The institutional churches are fleeing the rotting urban cores for the manicured suburbs.
Yes. Pastors are getting protective of their building funds.
And frankly, suburban congregations are starting to feel profoundly threatened by the raw, gritty outreach of the inner city missions.
Right. The missions are wading in the blood and dirt, and the suburbs are polishing their stained glass.
So there's this massive chasm between suburban resources and city needs.
And Berger found an advocate to bridge it, Dr. Bruce Larson at University Presbyterian Church.
What did Larson do?
He reframed the narrative completely. He told his wealthy suburban congregations that the rescue mission wasn't a competitor for their charity dollars.
Okay.
He branded the mission as the point people for the kingdom. He told pastors to look at the UGM as an authentic, highly specialized facility where their own members could go express real ministry.
I think he also said it eliminates the guilt feelings common in the rich, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's the corporate equivalent of positioning the UGM as the elite research and development or frontline special operations department for the broader religious community.
That's a perfect analogy.
The suburban headquarters had massive capital, but they lacked a ground game. They didn't know how to detox a heroin addict.
Right.
But how do you actually sell that? How do you convince a wealthy accountant to walk into the messy inner city?
It's the hardest sell in the nonprofit world. But Berger refused to use guilt.
No guilt.
He learned early on that guilt is a terrible short-term motivator. He didn't point fingers. His strategy was pure storytelling.
Show, don't tell.
Exactly. He'd share specific vignettes of transformed lives. He'd tell them about the MIT grad. He showed them the empirical results.
And that activated what the documents call the geometric equation of the gospel.
Yes. In the nonprofit world, organizations bleed themselves dry, competing for the same donor dollars.
They see each other as threats.
But the geometric equation says that when local institutions stop competing, drop their egos, and actually validate each other's ministries, the impact multiplies exponentially.
So his message was cooperative. We're not stealing your congregation. We're giving them a laboratory to do the heavy lifting.
Exactly. But the reality on the ground was that the heavy lifting was getting vastly more dangerous.
The 70s and 80s were totally different from the 1930s. The stoic lumberjacks were gone.
His street had darkened.
Berger documented a terrifying shift, right?
Yeah.
The feminization of poverty.
Yes. 1/4 of the people needing emergency housing were women and young children.
And many were the working poor people actively holding down full-time jobs but still couldn't afford housing.
And the behavioral mutation was even worse. The workers were suddenly dealing with younger, highly traumatized, amoral street kids.
Teenagers raised in pure chaos.
Ruthlessly survival-oriented. They wouldn't hesitate to manipulate or take violent advantage of the volunteers offering them love. The street had become a predatory ecosystem.
And to illustrate that emotional weight, the records highlight two contrasting narratives.
Yeah. The first is Casey.
Just a tragic story.
She was only 14 years old, an honor student. But her family structure collapsed. She rebelled against an abusive stepdad, ran into the city, and just experienced brutal, broken promises from adults.
And she turned to the booming cocaine trade to numb it.
Which forced her into prostitution. She became this heartbreaking revolving door at the mission. She'd respond to the love, seem to make progress, and then the addiction would hook her again.
And she'd vanish.
Ultimately, she was found dead on a cold city street with crack cocaine in her veins. And the detail that shatters the staff...
The gospel tract.
Yeah. The police found a crumpled, tear-stained gospel tract with the Union Gospel Mission's address in her purse.
A 14-year-old honor student, dead on the pavement, holding that address as her final tether to hope. That takes the wind right out of you.
It's the ultimate manifestation of systemic failure. But they immediately juxtapose Casey's tragedy with Calvin McVeigh.
Tell me about Calvin.
Calvin hit absolute rock bottom in 1985. Stripped of all dignity, no money, no home. But he caught hold. He went through the grueling programs. He stabilized.
Who got a profound faith.
He did. He eventually got hired by the mission and rose to become the director of transient services.
And a published poet.
Yes. He wrote, "When I'm tired of living, my Lord will supply me new hope."
The emotional whiplash of reading those two accounts back to back is severe. Casey, the tragedy, and Calvin, the triumph.
It is.
And it makes me think about the workers absorbing this daily. When you face the 80s crack epidemic, how do you even measure success? Because a bowl of soup doesn't fix a 14-year-old's crack addiction.
The old tools weren't enough. That's what forced their most radical evolution. They pivoted aggressively into long-term prevention.
Right. They brought in Jim Brass for the Reach Out Center.
Yeah. Jim survived being a street kid himself. He went into communities, set up gyms and latchkey programs across 7 at-risk schools. His philosophy was brilliant. Fix kids so fewer adults have to be repaired.
Fix kids so fewer adults have to be repaired. That should be the thesis of every social program.
Yeah.
It shifts from managing symptoms to curing the disease.
And for adults already broken, they brought in Jeff Butin for the New Vision program.
That was chemical dependency, right?
Yes. Buchan knew addiction is unmet need masquerading as a physical craving. You can't just detox someone biologically. If you don't rebuild their shattered identity, they'll relapse. He focused on building a profound relational base.
So now we have this massive, complex machine. They're grieving overdoses, running latchkey programs, and doing grueling rehabs.
A lot.
The compassion fatigue must be astronomical. How does the organization not implode from the trauma?
The Bergers instituted 4 absolute rules for the staff because these workers were more heart than head and very vulnerable to being manipulated.
What were the rules?
1, know why you are here. 2, balance love and law. 3, work with the light you have. 4, the sun will come up tomorrow.
I want to push back aggressively on Rule 2. Balance love and law. Society defines compassion as pure, boundaryless empathy. But my challenge is that unstructured empathy actually destroys the caregiver. Why is law, strict rules and consequences, a vital component of compassion?
It's crucial. Unbounded empathy is a fatal flaw because it assumes you have infinite emotional energy.
Which nobody has.
Exactly. When empathetic staff give away anything and everything, they hit a wall. If they don't balance the desire to alleviate suffering, love, with strict boundaries, law, they become cynical and bitter.
Boundaries act as a seawall.
And law protects the client. You can't rehabilitate someone by removing all consequences from their life. Law restores their agency. True compassion is providing the safety net, but demanding they learn to walk the tightrope themselves.
And to enforce that, they brought in unconventional staff from the corporate world.
Right. Like Gary Fast, a successful retailing exec. He took over the chaotic bargain center stores, brought corporate efficiency, and turned sorting donated goods into occupational therapy for recovering addicts.
And Gordon Preston.
28 years as a disciplined school teacher. He used classroom management to quietly de-escalate violent disturbances. They combine the heart of a missionary with the brain of a Fortune 500 company.
But even with the best systems, the financial reality of running this is brutal.
Razor-thin margins.
The records detail this terrifying crucible in the summer of 1990. They were approaching the summer slump, and the reserves were depleted.
Completely out of money by July.
And the bank has papers drawn up for a $150,000 short-term bridge loan.
Which is standard corporate practice.
But Berger, remembering Peterson's stretcher philosophy, flatly declines the lifeline, against all conventional wisdom.
He goes to the board, asks permission not to borrow it, calls the staff together, and calls for a collective day of fasting and prayer.
Just holding the line with empty pockets.
And without any solicitation, an anonymous donor steps up and completely pays off an $18,000 debt on one of their buildings. It freed up exactly enough monthly cash flow to survive.
It proved their thesis. God's currency is people.
Yes. But even when financial miracles happen, the grinding psychological toll remains.
Right. How did leaders like Shirley and the author cope?
Very practical defenses, mandatory prayer pauses, demanding staff take physical time away, forming tight-knit peer groups where they could just dump their trauma without judgment.
But the most profound mechanism to me is the hobby.
Oh, the hobby with an endpoint?
Yes. The records say our work is mostly open-ended, unfinished, and we seldom know the end of a story.
Like Casey, you pour your heart into a teenager, they walk out the doors, and you never know if they lived or died.
The human brain is not wired for that. We crave closure.
We need to see results. Chronic uncertainty causes corrosive fatigue.
So the antidote is to go home, walk into your garage, and build a wooden birdhouse.
Exactly. Or knit a sweater.
You deliberately engage in an activity where you have total control, you finish the steps, and you hold a complete product in your hands.
It gives the brain that hit of closure and measurable success that rescue mission work denies them. It's brilliant.
We have covered a staggering amount of ground today. From the greased logs of Skid Row, through the Depression, the crack epidemic of the 80s, to a massive 24-hour safety net.
And as the records note, the future is expensive.
Because tens of thousands of people are only 2 missed paychecks away from total homelessness. The need will never magically vanish.
It's an unending mission.
And the closing imagery of the text captures that perfectly.
The painting of the football player. He's battered, staring at the floor in agony, and the caption reads, "I quit."
But overlaid on that is an image of Jesus enduring the cross, with the caption, "I didn't."
It's the ultimate statement of endurance. The hardest part of helping a broken world isn't the physical labor or the cost. It's the willingness to be consistently present in an open-ended story where you rarely get a tidy conclusion.
You have to keep pouring the oil, even when you can't see the bottom of the vessel.
I challenge everyone listening to look at your own community. Who are the quiet people holding the line in those unfinished, messy stories? And what specific currency, time, capital, or support are they desperately lacking right now?
That's the perfect final thought. The safety net isn't magic. It's built by ordinary people who refuse to quit when the story remains painfully unfinished. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking for those points of light, and we'll see you next time.